The studies we did nearly 20 years ago, confirmed by the NIH, say these ketogenic diets in terms of fat loss and all the benefits are very highly overhyped.
Hello and welcome to the Wellness Zone podcast. I'm Mary Perry and I'm joined with Dr. Barry Sears, and today we're talking about the truth about ketogenic diets. So Dr. Sears, the ketogenic diet is not a new topic for us, but the science behind it and some of the misconceptions continue to expand. So let's just give a little bit of a background to our listeners as to what the ketogenic diet is.
Well, a ketogenic diet is any diet that causes the formation of excess ketone bodies. You say, so what? Well, that's why we don't have much definition. Now, the ketogenic diet was developed in the 1920s as a treatment for refractory epilepsy. And it was a terrible diet in terms of taste. About 80% of the calories were coming from fat, maybe a small amount from protein and an even smaller amount from carbohydrates. So you can imagine a diet consisting primarily of a pat of sugar every meal was not the most desirable diet. But it seemed to work. By the time we got to the 1970s, they had morphed it slightly to reduce the total fat from about 80% to about 60%, but still very low carbohydrates and throw in some extra protein. So really the ketogenic diet is not defined at all. And it also is not defined in terms of the amount of calories you should be consuming. So what a ketogenic diet, other than causing ketone bodies, is highly undefined.
Okay. And so it's interesting, Dr. Sears, because you just talked about the treatment of epilepsy, but most of us think about the ketogenic diet in terms of a weight loss diet.
Well, in terms of weight loss, yes, it's very good. In terms of fat loss, not so good. So let me explain. Now, what happens when you go on a ketogenic diet and you have very low amounts of carbohydrates in the diet? You start using up your stores in the liver, which is fine, except the fact is as you use up the stores, they are no longer need lots of water to hydrate them. So you lose a lot of water. Usually in the first week you say, look, I've lost 3 pounds of weight. Yes, but maybe a half a pound, maybe a quarter a pound of fat, and the rest is retained water. And then the fat loss slows down. So again, from that standpoint of saying, okay, you have to distinguish weight from fat. Now, very careful studies recently done at the NIH in people in controlled metabolic chambers. They would give them basically diets of a ketogenic diet or a high carbohydrate, low fat diet and say, okay, eat as much as you want. What happened? Well, those who basically ate the ketogenic diet, they actually began to basically, they lost weight, but most of it was water weight. And their fat loss was actually much slower than those on the low fat, high carbohydrate diet. So that's why we have to distinguish between fat loss and weight loss. And that's why that you have to have, say, how many calories, as is the case of calories in, calories out. That has not changed. It will not change tomorrow, and it will not change in the year 2525.
And it's interesting, Dr. Sears, because you would almost think that there would be, with a higher carbohydrate diet, you wouldn't think that you would lose as much fat. So it's interesting that in the comparison of the two, which one leaned that way.
And more importantly, the studies at the NIH confirmed studies that we published back in 2007 that showed under isocaloric conditions, means the amount of calories were identical, comparing a ketogenic diet to the zone diet, and also the fact that all the meals were being prepared. What were the results? Those on the ketogenic diet, they lost less weight than on the zone diet, they lost less fat than on the zone diet, and they had lesser ability to recover or have more fatigue during exercise, and they were losing calcium. And as a woman, where do you lose most of the calcium from? Your bones. So again, studies we did nearly 20 years ago, confirmed by the NIH, saying these ketogenic diets in terms of fat loss and all the benefits are very highly overhyped.
And we also saw an increase in inflammation as well. So I don't know if you want to touch on that a bit.
Well, that was the most ominous aspect. Say what? Inflammation? Yes. One of the best markers of inflammation is the ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA. And on the zone diet, it decreased, as you would expect. On the ketogenic diet, it increased. Now, like I said, now we combine this and say it doesn't sound very good, and there's even more bad news. Because now we have new recent studies that the ketogenic diet increases the numbers of senescent cells in your body. And again, from our previous conversations, what are senescent cells? They're bad. They're zombie cells. And what they do, they accelerate aging and they accelerate the development of chronic disease. So what you had here is a study that showed that in terms of animal studies, that those on a ketogenic diet basically start to see large increases in senescent cells. And when they were switched now to a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, the senescent cells disappeared. Say, well, that means that I should be on a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. No, it just says you should not be on a ketogenic diet. Now, when they were looking also at human studies, people who are basically doing a protocol for ketogenic diets, they were also seeing the same rise in senescent cells. So again, we're having a lot of bad news come in saying, what's really the consequences if you stay on a ketogenic diet for a lifetime?
You know what's interesting too, Dr. Sears, is the kind of the downsides that you're talking about with the ketogenic. You know, you talk about the water weight loss. So people initially lose this weight and they feel good about it, but they're losing the muscle mass, and you're seeing all these other things that kind of decrease. It sounds very similar to the stuff that you've talked about in terms of Ozempic and weight loss drugs.
Well, again, and what's the difference between basically now the ketogenic diet, the zone diet, and Ozempic? Well, at least in Ozempic, you are losing weight. Why? Because you're changing the levels of hormones that reach the brain that basically tell the appetite centers, stop eating. And if you stop eating, what happens? You consume less calories. Now, if you consume less calories, you activate AMPK, the master regulator of your metabolism. And what does AMPK do? It burns stored fat faster. So again, in this respect, the zone diet and Ozempic are similar in that we're changing hormonal levels. And by doing so, both diets are activating AMPK. So again, that right now people say, I want to lose weight, I'll try the ketogenic diet. I say, I don't feel so good, I'll try Ozempic, I don't feel so good. Then try the zone diet. It requires a little more effort, but basically there's no hunger, there's no fatigue. And once you master it, you're done forever. So again, that losing weight, there's no magic aspect. You have to reduce calories, but without hunger or fatigue.
I always say everything in moderation, Dr. Sears, and that's really what the zone diet is. And so here you've talked about you burn fat faster, you retain your lean body mass, you lower inflammation, you increase AMPK. What's not to like?
Well, that's a pretty good definition of the zone diet and all the reasons you want to follow it, not for a week, not for a month, but for the rest of your life.